When I was a kid, my dad could only really cook one thing well. Sorry, Dad. It was boiling ribs in an oven or on a stovetop, taking them outside, charring them on the grill with a little bit of store-bought sauce. Do it for a crowd and people lose their minds. Make it for a graduation or a 4th of July party. Seriously, people go crazy. In this video, I'm going to show you what ribs to use, how to cook them. I'm going to prove to you that making your own barbecue sauce is worth it. And then we're going to do some crunchy slaw as a side to cut through some of that fat on these ribs. So we basically have 3 options when it comes to buying ribs for this recipe. Number 1 is baby back ribs. These come from the top section of the rib cage and are usually the most expensive and the lightest in terms of like porky rib flavor. Still a great option. They cook a little bit faster. They're just not as flavorful, and I prefer the ribs from the bottom section of the rib cage, which leads me to number 2, which is spare ribs. It's basically the entire bottom half of the rib cage. It includes the rib tips and a little bit of belly. They're not that uniform, and there's a lot of cartilage in the bottom. That's why they're not my favorite choice, but there's a ton of flavor, and these are not that expensive. The third option, and my favorite, is the St. Louis style rib. It's basically the middle section of the rib cage or the top part of the spare rib. You've lost the rib tips and some of that belly and cartilage on the bottom, and you have this really uniform rib shape throughout, just like a baby back rib. It looks great on a grill. It's a very flavorful rib. It has a great presentation, and it also happens to be the cheapest one at my grocery store. So we're gonna grab our racks, we're gonna cut them out of the packaging, and then we're gonna remove the silver skin. This is easy. Just run your finger in between the ribs underneath and just kind of lift it up. It'll start to separate, and then you're gonna grab it with your whole hand and pull it towards one end. If you don't wanna mess with pulling off this silver skin, most butchers will clean them up for you. You just have to ask. We're gonna cut these racks into 2 6-ish bone half slabs, and we're gonna set them aside. We're gonna make a quick rub to season these ribs and to bring a little bit of smokiness. To do that, in a bowl, combine 1 tablespoon chili powder, 1 tablespoon black pepper, 1 teaspoon garlic powder, and 1 tablespoon salt. Stir this to combine and then grab a slab. We're gonna season this generously with 5 to 6 pinches per side, and then we're gonna double wrap it with foil. As you can see here, I'm wrapping one side, flipping it over so that the open top is covered on the bottom, and then I'm gonna wrap it again. We wanna seal the steam and juices into these, and creating little tight wrapped foil packets is how we do that. We're gonna preheat the oven at 275 degrees, throw our ribs on a sheet tray, and set a timer for 3 hours. We're gonna be cooking these low and slow before we worry about the grill. This is a simple process of just melting the internal connective tissue and all that marbled fat so the meat becomes tender, juicy, and just pulls off the bone. Note that I said pull off the bone. I am not in the camp that says falling off the bone is the ideal end state for ribs. I love tender, juicy meat, but I also want to know that I'm eating meat on a bone. So the tenderness that we're going for here is when you bite it, it pulls off. You don't have to work on it like a dog bone, but it just kind of separates naturally with a little bit of pull from you and your teeth. If you want it falling off the bone, add a 45 minutes to our initial 3 hours. It'll tremble and shred and disintegrate just by looking at it. So our ribs are started, and I want to mention that these ribs should probably be made ahead. They char on the grill better, they stay together easier, and it's just all around more fun and easy if you're having people over for a barbecue. In that event, all we're doing is pulling them out of the fridge when the grill is hot and throwing them on with some barbecue sauce. Speaking of sauce, we're gonna be making some right now. But by the way, store-bought sauce totally works. 90% of the dad ribs I've ever eaten or made in my entire life are made with store-bought sauce. So let me know in the comments, are you guys loyalists to any sauces? I think I'm an open pit onion flavored guy. I could go KC Masterpiece, Malls, Sweet Baby Ray's, I don't know. Let me know. To actually make this sauce, we're gonna peel and grate a whole small red onion on a box grater. Grating it like this helps it melt into the sauce and gives us a mellow, oniony sweetness that I identify as like a secret ingredient in exceptional barbecue sauce. Once we're grated, we're gonna throw this onion into a small saucepan and put it over medium heat along with 35 grams of neutral oil like sunflower or canola oil. I'm also gonna add 1 large clove of garlic that I've run through a garlic press. We're gonna stir this to combine and sweat it out for 3 to 4 minutes with a strong pinch of salt until the liquid's cooked off and it's just starting to soften. At this point, we're gonna add the rest of our ingredients. That's 250 grams of ketchup, 20 grams hot sauce, 5 grams of Worcestershire, 100 grams of molasses, 20 grams of yellow mustard, 30 grams of apple cider vinegar, and 1 gram each chili powder and chili flake. We're gonna stir all that up to combine, and we're gonna simmer that on low for about 15 minutes to slightly reduce and let everything get to know each other. After 15 minutes, that sauce should look like this. It's noticeably darker, it's thick, it's got some large bubbles that should just be popping through. We're gonna set that aside to cool, and then we're gonna figure out a side to go with our ribs. When I think of rich, fatty ribs, I want something that's tart tart and cold and crunchy to kind of counterbalance that richness. Today we're gonna be making a sweet vinegar slaw to balance that out. For that, you're gonna start with a medium small head of green cabbage. We're gonna cut that in half and core it out, and we're gonna finely shred it here. I'm gonna start out with a mandolin. That's my preferred method. I use a Japanese mandolin slicer here. I do not recommend those heavy, expensive German ones. They tear your hands to shreds. But you can also use a knife. As you can see here, we're just looking to get this cabbage as thin as possible. All day we need 500 grams of shredded cabbage, so I'm gonna measure that into a bowl, I'm gonna set it aside, and then I'm gonna grab a large carrot. I'm using my julienne peeler here, and I highly recommend you get one. I mentioned this in a previous video, but they're available for about $4 or $5 online. I'll link to one below. It's invaluable for taking large vegetables and turning them into smaller vegetables. We're gonna shred this carrot off. You can use a knife if you don't have a julienne peeler. We're looking for 100 grams. We're gonna throw that in the bowl with the cabbage. We're gonna grab half of a red onion, and we're just gonna slice that thinly. We need 150 grams of that all day. We're gonna throw it into our mesh strainer, and we're gonna do exactly what I always do with raw red onions, which is we're gonna rinse it under cold water. That's the stuff that gives you onion breath 2 or 3 hours later. So rinsing it under cold water helps us get rid of it, helps making eating raw onions fun again. Throw that in the bowl. We need 150 grams all day. On top of that, we're gonna measure 30 grams of salt and 20 grams of sugar. We're gonna toss well to combine, and then we're gonna let this sit on the counter for 30 minutes. Doing this cures it, draws out some of the moisture, and makes the veggies a little bit more tender. 30 minutes later, we're gonna strain off the liquid, or better yet, grab a salad spinner and spin off the liquid. Once it's dry, we're gonna throw this into a tall container, and you'll see why in a second. We're gonna measure out 200 grams of cider vinegar and 100 grams of sugar, and we're gonna add a strong pinch of chili flake as well. I'm gonna puree this with an immersion blender, but you can also whisk vigorously to dissolve the sugar. We're gonna pour this over the slaw to quickly pickle it. We're gonna do that for 30 minutes. This acid and sugar is gonna give us a light, crunchy side that's gonna boost our experience to a higher place when we go to eat these ribs later on. After 30 minutes, we drain off the liquid, we set it aside, and now it's rib time. So I'm checking back on these ribs. It's 3 hours later, and I think they're exactly where I want them. I'm gonna peek into the foil with a fork, and they want to shred. They feel tender, and I can get my fork all the way in without much resistance. That little bit of resistance is important. They're gonna carry over quite a bit in this foil packet when we set them on the counter to cool down, so we don't want them 100% cooked. We're looking for maybe 85% of the way there. So we're gonna leave them wrapped in foil on the counter for an hour and a half to cool down, to rest, finish cooking, and after that 90 minutes, I'm gonna throw them on a plate to put them in the fridge to cool down. And here's a fun little pro move here. Take that resting juice from the sheet tray, pour it into your barbecue sauce, stir it in. We don't wanna lose any porkiness. We don't want that going down the drain. So add it in, set your sauce aside. Let's get our grill going. Whew. We gotta pull an audible. I was getting the grill fired up to char off these ribs, and it started to downpour, and it is still downpouring. I checked the internet. We were supposed to get good grilling weather. I did not expect this, but I do have a backup plan. I'm gonna fire up my broiler, get it going at 550, as hot as it'll go, and we're gonna have the same outcome. We're gonna have charred, glazed, sticky ribs that have kind of like a sweet, smoky, sour barbecue sauce on the outside, so don't sweat it. Now we're doing rainy day ribs. So I'm firing up my broiler. I'm gonna grab the ribs out of the fridge. They're nice and cooled and set up. We're gonna throw them on a sheet pan with a wire rack, and I'm gonna broil those babies. I've got my broiler running super hot. I'm gonna put these in first without sauce. We wanna get a base layer on the belly side of these ribs, and that takes about 2 minutes. At that point, I'm gonna grab my sauce, and we're gonna liberally brush these ribs. Dad ribs are all about that lacquer. They're all about the sauce. So we wanna make sure that we get a ton of this sauce on the outside, and you're not gonna regret it. We're gonna throw these back under the broiler for 2 minutes, let that sauce reduce and get glazed, and then we're gonna hit it with a second coat. I'm doing 2 half slabs here because it's just Lauren and I for dinner, but this recipe and this sauce do 4 half racks all day, or 2 full slabs. We're gonna throw this back under the broiler, and at this point they look great. I'm gonna hit the backside once with some sauce and some broil, just to get that perfectly sticky, perfectly glazed all around rib. And if you wanted a really dark, crusty, lacquered rib, you could go 3 or 4 times before you'd have to worry about the sugar and the sauce getting burnt. But here we have it. Our ribs are hot, they're sticky, they're fully glazed and charred, just like they would be on the grill, and we're ready to have a little indoor rib party now. Thank you, platter of ribs. Ooh. Sweet barbecue sauce, but not like too sweet, just enough to bring it into balance. I'm gonna wash it down with some of this stuff. That's sweet and salty. I'm gonna eat this rib now. Ribs have a totally unique flavor. Tastes like no other part of the pig. They're really nice and lacquered. That sauce is fully stuck to this rib. You guys like ribs, right? This is the USA after all. So that's it. Super easy, craveable ribs that your dad would be proud to serve at a graduation party or his famous 4th of July barbecue. And your dad gets it. Ribs are fun and they're easy and they taste great. All we need to do is pay attention to the details and bring a little bit of balance to the table. And grilling season is just getting started. 4th of July is around the corner. Father's Day is coming up. This could and should be a backyard staple in your repertoire. As always, guys, if you got value out of this content, tell a friend, hit subscribe. And if you end up cooking this stuff, tag us on Instagram. We're at Weeds and Sardines, and we absolutely love seeing what you guys do with these recipes. Thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you for your time and attention. We'll see you next time.